The Jewish part of Israel is 7 million people. Iran has 90 million people. You don't do that. You don't attack a country of 90 million with 7 million. And you sure don't do it while you're busy fighting a war in Gaza, which the whole world condemns you for. And Iran has very close relations with Russia and very good relations with China. What are you doing? The act was an act of desperation. The hope of Mr. Netanyahu, obvious to those who follow, was to draw the United States in. And Mr. Trump, when he listened apparently to Mr. Netanyahu and didn't listen to all the voices, including inside the Republican Party, that said don't do that, did it. Whereupon Mr. Trump discovered that what he had unleashed was a conflict between Israel and Iran that almost everyone other than the American media, who are useless in this situation, in a way that exceeds bias and exceeds jingoism. This is straight out propagandistic nonsense. Everyone else in the world realizes that the supports Iran has in its own country and its border with Russia and its treaties with Russia and its support from China versus Israel is a slam dunk of the worst sort. It's not a sustainable arrangement. And so we now see the backtracking of a desperate Trump who has to try to call off what he just turned on. Yes, he's a herky-jerky leader. Everyone knows that now. He displays that all the time. But that should not obscure us. What we're seeing here is the herky-jerky behavior of someone who's trapped. There is no future for this whole business until you sit down and try to find one. There may be one, but warfare, no, that's not a solution. That's not sustainable. That's a losing proposition. And it was before he dropped the bombs on Tehran and the nuclear bases. All of Europe had dozens of commentators, just to conclude, who enjoyed pointing out that even according to the International Atomic Energy Commission, the refined, the enriched uranium and the mechanisms to further enrich it, to make it, if they were in those three places, had been removed from those three places. So that even if your bombs got there, which was an open question, this kind of warfare hasn't been done before with bombs like that. And the Iranians had put all of this in the middle of a mountain. So it was unknown. But the point was it wouldn't matter. They have the scientists, they have the laboratories, they have the experience, and they have the uranium. What are you doing in that situation? Showing that you can bomb? Everybody knows that. Showing that you will in this situation? Given Ukraine, there's not much doubt about that either. So this was very impulsive, but that's not the important point. It's the larger historical dead end that's being acted out. Yeah, they're desperate. Yeah, it's herky-jerky. What else do you expect once you understand that they're stuck in a colonial project that is an absolute no-win situation for Israel and the West? The only sad thing is they don't want to see it. They can't see it any more than they can see what they're doing in Gaza and how the whole world looks at it. And you have to explain that. Jewish people are no more intrinsically violent than anybody else, and they're no more blind than anybody else. So you have to ask the question, under what pressure would people like that, and I won't even add, who themselves know from their own grandparents what it's like to be on the wrong end of that kind of a situation, even they, you have to explain that, and you answer it by saying when people are put in unbearable, contradictory situations, their normal ways of looking at the world, of commiserating with other human beings, disappear, and they act like cornered animals with a level of frustration and desperation that usually ends up putting them in an even worse position. The United States is a declining empire. And what you see week after week, and now year after year, are the symptoms, the signs of that. And let me give you some examples. Israel is a very small country. Israel is trying to do something which was feasible 2 centuries ago. It's called settler colonialism. It's when you move a group of Europeans into a non-European area, you exclude the people one way or another, and you basically populate that area with the arriving Europeans instead of whoever lived there before. It worked 2.5 centuries ago because that's what the United States is. And we went to the final solution of the settler colonial project, which is literally exterminating all of those people. What Hitler did to Jews and gypsies and communists and socialists was not new. It was the repeat of what had been done by Germans, but also by lots of other Europeans all over the world. The first book I ever wrote as a young man was a study of British colonialism in Kenya, in which I studied what the British did from the time they arrived to the time that an uprising of the African people there, known in the world as the Mau Mau Revolution, drove them out. And you see that everywhere in the world. The last century and a half have been and will be in the future called the era of anti-colonialism. It's the overwhelming story of the overwhelming majority of the people on this planet. India, which was a formal colony, China, which was half a colony, and so on. What Israel is trying to do is to go against a century and a half of historical movement in the opposite direction, to undo settler colonialism, to apologize for settler colonialism, whether it's the Maori in New Zealand or the indigenous people in Australia or the Africans in South Africa, and you could go on. This is hopeless. And this has nothing to do with the particulars. You can't do now what you could do 2 centuries ago, especially if the intervening period has been an era of anti-colonialism. So what Israel has done, not willing to give up that project, and let's remember, it was British colonialism that created this opportunity for Jews escaping Europe. What Israel has done is hooked itself up to the biggest, toughest military in the world, the United States, and basically made a decision to become the military outpost of the remaining empire, the U.S. empire. And this meant it was the flashpoint for everything against all of that. And most, of course, immediately in the Arab countries that surround Israel and the larger Muslim world which surrounds Israel. And what we have seen and what we're watching today is the slow, painful, but inevitable process of teaching the Israelis that this is not going to work. Now, for a while, it can. For a while, it may continue. They have enormous commitment to military everything, and they have the endless provision of the means coming from the United States. That is their alliance. And Israel has worked very hard to support the political forces in the United States to support that alliance for obvious reasons. But it can't work. That's why the conflict never stops. The Palestinians have demonstrated that even under genocidal oppression, they're not leaving. That's incredible, given what they have suffered. They're not leaving. And they have appealed to their Arab and Islamic brothers and sisters to support them and to become problems for Israel, which those others have become. Not just Hamas, but Hezbollah, but on, and I won't rehearse it all. We all have been living through it. Eventually, they would overcome what had been their long-term good luck. That the Arab countries, and this is no credit to them either, that the Arab countries were afraid. Anyone who pushed back too much against Israel would get bombed, would get missiled, would get overthrown, and would incur the risk that the United States would help. And they didn't trust each other. And so every now and then, one of them would make a deal with Israel to be allowed to do something that the others might not be. Not a pretty picture. But eventually, the Arab countries figured all this out. If I can understand it, so can they. And they realized we have to come up with one of us that can show the Israelis why and how we're willing to fight back. And they found two. The first one is this mysterious group referred to in the American media as the Houthis. The Houthis is a part of the population of Yemen, one of the poorest countries on earth, basically a sliver of inhabitable land in an otherwise desert over there. People who very frugal, very hardworking, able to live on next to nothing. And slowly it became clear they are located where they can stop shipping in an important part of the world economy, and they can shoot missiles into Israel. And nobody can stop them. The United States tried. Earlier this year, a month of steady, heavy bombing by the United States had no effect. Oh yes, we killed a few people. We broke a few buildings. Couldn't stop it. Can't stop it now. The second was Iran. Iran is a supporter of Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, fill in the blank. And why? Because it is too big and too powerful and too well connected for the Israelis to dare. And what did the Israelis do? What in a way they had to do. I'm not excusing them. I'm trying to understand their logic. They had to show that they would do what everybody was counting on them to be smart enough not to do. So they attacked Iran. A spectacular example of something that is utterly anachronistic. It's a phenomena out of date, out of time. The last 150 years have been, if they've been anything, a period of anti-colonial transformation in which the majority of the world's people struggled painfully and difficult, and it took a long time to undo the colonialization by Western Europe, North America, and Japan. And Israel is the outstanding remainder. Here we have a settler colonialism in the 21st century, after a century and a half of anti-colonialism, trying to establish and to expand a settler colonialism. And it finds the whole world organized against it. Should have brought them to the idea, why would we be doing something that the whole world votes against in every United Nations vote it has ever taken, not to speak of all the other way? And why would the United States line itself with this small country doing something so or anti-historical? Well, the suggestion is they have something in common. And I think they do, that the United States sees in Israel its own project of trying to hold on to what is unsustainable. And that's why there is such a level of gloom and depression and desperation and dogged determination to keep doing this, because there's an awareness, however dim, that history is moving rapidly in the other direction. The combination of the ancient settler colonialism project in Israel and the explosion of the People's Republic of China, economically, politically, militarily, that has got to be a contrast that is stunning. And I know, as an American, and I have my connections here, that the people at the very top are very aware of that contradiction. The China story on the one hand and the Israel story. You even have, in the last 24 hours, the emergence of a strong argument here in the United States, inside the Democratic Party and even inside the Republican Party, that the United States has now paid its debt to Israel. It has discharged its obligation to Israel. Another quote. We can now walk away from this and concentrate on China because we are no longer hanging on to the Israelis. They now have to do it for themselves, which is, of course, absurd, because never have the Israelis been in more difficulty relative to the enemies they have made than they are right now. But it shows you even the extreme right wing, which endorsed the attack on Iran, wants it to be the end of that whole story. And that will help explain the almost pathetic way that the American leadership, other than Trump, he's out of control, but the American leadership wants this to be understood as an attack only on the nuclear facilities, the three cities, not for regime change, not against Islam. No, please, no. Now let us please tell you the very limited meaning of what we've just done. That won't work very well, but the desperation behind it, people should see. The term fair trade has actually, in the last 50 years, been a term of the left in America, in the United States. And Mr. Trump, because he doesn't know or care, was borrowing this term from the left. Let me give you an example. In many parts of the United States, if you go into a grocery store looking for some kind of food, coffee or sugar, you will be offered on the shelf something called the product, whatever it is, and then fair trade brand of the product. And you'll discover for a few pennies more per pound of coffee or sugar or whatever, you are told this will now go to treating the peasant in wherever this product comes from better. So if you believe that they should be given a decent livelihood in Latin America, where they make the coffee or where they make the sugar or where they make the fill in the blank, you can willingly pay a higher price for what is called fair traded items. They don't have the phrase free trade, but the rest is free trade. This is fair trade. The same people that Mr. Trump denounces as Marxist, socialist, leftist, fascist, because he puts all those are synonyms for him. He denounces them. He took from them the whole concept of fair trade. Again, the beauty of ignorance, uses it to support these people in the United States. He likes President McKinley, a person who most people who are asked to name American president would never remember. He has zero importance in American history. He, for a while, supported tariffs in the end of the 19th century. So somebody told Trump this. So he aligned himself, because it was important to align yourself with somebody in the American past. He can't do Lincoln because his white supremacists would be very unhappy. So he chose McKinley, which was smart, because no one ever heard of Mr. McKinley or has a vaguest idea what he is. He stands for nothing. The polling here in the United States, and I understand all the problems with polling, but the polling shows one thing that I think is important that most people do not, in my judgment, give enough attention to. And that is, yes, Mr. Trump's popularity party is going down pretty sharply and pretty much across many different polls. So I'm not relying on one. CNN here does a nice job of gathering half a dozen different polls and then giving the results of the average of all of them. So it's clear that in the latest number, which came out today, 42% of Americans approve of Mr. Trump and 56% of Americans disapprove of Mr. Trump. But here's what the polling also shows. A record number of people disapprove of the Democratic Party because it is so weak as an opposition. In other words, what's really remarkable and what points to the future is that never have the conditions been better for a breaking out of the duopoly of those two parties in our political system. And this is understood above all by the Bernie Sanders wing. In this country, they're called populist, bizarre language. The populist wing of the Democratic Party is the most likely beneficiary of this, and the greatest risk is that the Republican Party will split because of this, that the disaffection of the right wing, which, by the way, is not happy with the events in Iran, that this is the wing that doesn't want to support Israel much anymore, doesn't want war, responds to Mr. Trump when he says no more war, and is very, very upset now by the fact that the wars are not going away. That is going to hurt him politically. I'm very interested in the polls of the coming days and weeks to see the impact on that. But that political situation is now changing. And if you add to that Mr. Trump has been unable to stop the rising prices, they're not rising quickly, but they continue to rise. And for most Americans, that's the problem. It's not the rate which it goes, it's that it keeps going. And he hasn't been able to solve that problem. And most of the financial press, left-wing, right-wing, and in the middle, believes we're going to have a recession in the second half of this year or next year or both. You put all that together, and then the Republican Party has got some major difficulties. The rise of Britain is the rise of the whole concept of free trade, the endless effort, starting, with David Ricardo, if not earlier, to demonstrate how you can conceptualize the economy in which free trade is the best policy for everyone. I remember I have my PhD in economics. I'm sitting in the classrooms, and I'm a product of American elite education. So I was sitting in Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, arguably the three best universities in the country, and my professors in each place said the same thing to us, giving us demonstrations mathematically, geometrically, empirically, historically, every way you want, why free trade is absolutely the bestable arrangement. And it was so dominant that it was used as a way of explaining why the British became the British Empire, which is a bit of a stretch, but they did that. And why now the United States was, if anything, a bigger empire because it was even more committed. And this is especially true in the period of the second half of the 20th century, when the Americans were replacing the British everywhere, Asia, Africa, Latin America. The British had never been in Latin America, but that was a deal that the British gave the United States back in the 19th century. You can have South America. The reality is, look at the irony. Neoliberal free tradeism is in complete disarray now as an ideology, as a policy. It is rejected, it is ignored, it is denounced in various ways. It is, by large sections of the population, blamed for the problems America has today. We don't want free movement of people. That's the anti-immigrant hysteria. We don't want free trade. The leader of the free world is a man who puts tariffs literally everywhere as fast as he can. I mean, you couldn't not caricature the rejection of free trade that this is performing. And then the completion of the irony, which makes your point, China is the great champion of globalization, says so. They make those statements all the time. They're not against, oh no, they don't want tariff, they want free trade, they want what the British wanted in the 19th century, they want in this century, and the British are running away from that. Not that they matter anymore, but all of the old champions of the free trade are busily learning arguments which, if you're familiar with the history of all of this, you will know that, for example, Liszt and other German thinkers in the 19th century were as busy denouncing free trade because it held back the German Wirtschaftswunder. They wanted to be able to control their situation. And that has always been a much bigger theme of German economic thinking. And that's not because of something peculiar to the German language or culture. It has to do with exactly the point you're making. I'm a professor. I've been a professor in the American university system all of my adult life. When I began, most of my students who got a PhD, which is the highest credential we give, would go on to become academics in their own right. They would become professors in other universities. Now, the majority of my students, and I still teach, cannot find academic jobs. Or if they do, they are inadequate. They don't pay enough money to live, so they will mix a part-time academic job, teaching a couple of courses, with a non-academic job in order to feed the family, in order to literally, very stark. We close colleges here in the United States. Every so often I am besieged by former students who have been professors a few years, and the college or university where they are has closed, and they need me to help them find another position by writing letters of recommendation and all the usual things that we do in this society. So yes, and look at Mr. Elon Musk, brought in to simply fire tens of thousands of people across all kinds of government agencies, including the Department of Education, the infrastructure building departments of all kinds. This is not affordable. This is said. It's not affordable, given the fact that we have priorities, which include military. That part of the budget, for example, that is being decided right now in the U.S. Senate, the part of the budget that goes for defense is $100 billion more, roughly, than it was last year. So that's a priority. At the same time, our government is running $2 to $3 trillion deficits per year. That is a serious priority to get that down. Result, economize on every social program there is. And that includes health, education, you name it. It's all being cut back. And this is explained as required by the economic. They don't run away from that. That is required by the economic reality of a national debt that is now 130% of the GDP, by the level of deficits we are in the middle of. And so, yes, everything you say is not being contextualized as a problem of a declining empire. No. There, the taboo against that means it's never explained in those terms. It is instead explained as the specific requirements of the historical moment. And by the way, not that it's the major cause, but one of the things that makes the attack on Iran useful is that it reinforces the military dangers and the military requirements of the moment. It will be pointed to shut up anybody who questions the amount of money being shifted to the military and away from the infrastructure and from what people need. It will be the number one political effort of the Democratic Party in the next 18 months to the next election. It will be a relentless effort to suggest that we could be militarily safe and do the social programs, and that if you vote for Democrats, you'll get that. And that, hopefully, they hope, will undercut the belief of people that they have to support the Republicans despite the decline in in social programs because of the military necessity. Because they don't allow any other issues in, that will probably be the campaign. Or to say the same thing in simpler terms, whoever the Democratic candidate will be will say, I'm better than Trump and the Republicans because I'm not as bad as they are on these issues. That's it. There is no positive program. There is no social analysis. You got a choice between bad and worse. I'm merely bad. They are worse.